right, today we're looking at the 5 hidden leadership gaps that really sabotage a team's success. And we're going to look at why that happens and what we can do about it. So, we've been on teams since we were very small children. We may have been on a play team, we may have been on a sports team, a work team, a school team, a debate team, all kinds of teams. Even music groups can be considered a team. And we've always been told to play nice on those teams. And so we get into the work world and we come in with that same concept. Okay, we're going to play nice while we're on this team. And here's what happens. What if the other people aren't playing nice? What if there's a lot of politicking or posturing, or people are looking out for themselves? That doesn't make for a productive team. A productive, high functioning team will make better and faster decisions. They'll tap into the skills and opinions of other members on the team that are different than their own. They won't waste time and energy and being destructive and conflict. And they'll avoid wasting time talking about the wrong issues or revisiting a topic over and over and over again. I'm sure I'm not the only one that's been on a team that discusses things time after time after time and never makes a decision or does anything. And pretty soon it's forgotten about. The other thing that makes a productive team really good is that they become very creative because they're tapping into the resources of everybody and they're more fun to be on. Sometimes we have to look when we say, we have a team and to work. Do we really have a team, or do we just have a group of people that report to the same manager? Because not every group is a team. And many that are just reporting to a manager, they don't really hold any accountability to each other. And that reduces the ability to get the results that they really could be getting if they were functioning as a team. And teams that are ready to work together and do that heavy lifting, yes, initially it might take some time to build that team cohesiveness, but it's going to save you time in the end. We have to look at the leader in an organization. Is the leader committed to building cohesive teams and highly functioning teams? Because that leadership does matter. And is that leader committed to the transformation that's going to need to happen? You know, sometimes leaders may seem a bit uninterested in this, and they may be skeptical about achieving a high producing team. But as long as maybe a team leader is willing to work to put together with the good intentions, it can still happen. So let me go through the 5 parts that we need to have a really highly effective team. You have to have trust, which is being honest and vulnerable to your other team members, to let them know where your weaknesses are, where your strengths are. The second thing we need is conflict to debate issues. Now, that may seem counterintuitive that you want to have conflict on a highly functioning team, but that's how you get to the best decisions. Then you have to have commitment to all the team members, that you're, one for all for one type of commitment. And then accountability. Do you hold each other accountable to the decisions that you made? And are you willing to call somebody out if they've fallen short? And then the results. When you have the results, or when you have these other 4 in place, the trust, the conflict, the commitment, the accountability, the results will happen. So let's break down each of these 5 components. Building trust. Trust is the foundational piece of this whole thing. If you don't have trust, you're not going to have a highly effective team. And trust is about being comfortable with who you are and with your other team members. It's about being open and honest. It's about being vulnerable. I remember on a team that I was on in a training. So it wasn't really a work team per se. It was just one team within all these training groups. And I remember saying, when we were young, we did thus and such when we were brought up. And I remember one of the people on that team became very vulnerable. And she says, "You have no idea what my childhood was like," and started to share. And at that moment, I knew I could not relate to how she was brought up, but I started to understand who she was. You see, that's the beauty of being able to be vulnerable and to be able to share with each other in a way that others will get to understand you. And some of those times you may have somebody that you feel is very difficult to work with. And when they open up and they become vulnerable and you're willing to listen, you start to understand where they're coming from. And it doesn't mean that maybe some of their behaviors don't still bother you, but you understand and you accept them for who they are. And this is something I think is really missing in our society when we look at organizations of all kinds. That vulnerability, that willingness to understand that not everybody's like us. Not everybody has our experiences, has our background. And when we can start to understand that, then we can start to build more functioning teams. We have to be able to not only, discuss us, but being able to admit to ourselves where our weaknesses are. And we have to be willing to engage with each other. Now, if you have a team that lacks trust, this is what happens. They often hide from their mistakes or their weaknesses. They'll conceal it. They'll maybe even lie about having done something. They won't ask for help because they'll see that as you thinking you're not good enough. And they won't really help people outside of maybe their own people that they're responsible for. Teams that have no trust often jump to conclusions about what maybe was said or, react to something that was totally innocent. But because there is no trust, they jump to those assumptions. And they tend not to look at the skills of other people and their experiences. Generally, teams without trust waste a lot of time and energy, and the leaders end up having to manage a lot of these behaviors that are not conducive to getting the results that they want. And that's just a waste of time for that leader. Teams that are not real effective tend to hold grudges. They find reasons not to spend time together. So when you have a team that does trust, they'll admit to things like, "I was wrong. I made a mistake. I need your help. I'm not sure. You're better at that than I am." They realize those things. And they don't doubt the motives of others. They don't question. They don't talk about somebody behind their back or go out in the hall and have a different conversation than what they had in a room. I'm sure we've all seen that too. And teams that are cohesive are willing to take a risk because they respect each other and they respect the abilities of everybody on that team. So once you have that trust established, and that is the biggest foundation, then you can go to the next step, which is to master conflict. If you're going to master and have productive conflict, you're going to have trust first. And when you have this, it's debate around an issue and debate around a decision, not a debate around the people. And that's the difference you'll see in teams that have a lot of trust. They're going to debate issues. They're not going to debate somebody and their opinion. They're going to have constructive arguments, not destructive. And they're going to look at everybody's point of view. When you don't have productive conflict, you may see people trying to manipulate. And they'll, instead of being willing to open up inside the group, inside the team, they're the ones that will take that conversation to the hallway with somebody that maybe is or isn't on the team and have a discussion. I remember one team I was on, there was one very vocal person. And because that person had the opinion that they were always right and had the best ideas, I'm sure you've seen that too. They made it difficult for others that had a different opinion to be able to share, because they would shut them down as soon as somebody else would open their mouth and they didn't agree with it. And pretty soon, this is exactly what happens. People stop sharing. People stop giving their opinion, even if they have a really good idea. They tend not to speak up, but then they'll go behind that person's back and they'll try to undermine maybe what's happened. So when we speak about mastering conflict, we're talking about productive conflict. And it can become very passionate. You know, they don't fear teams that are highly functioning and have a lot of trust. They don't fear conflict. They don't have boring meetings, but they also don't make personal attacks. Kind of like that commercial, you know, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. What happens on the team stays on the team. Because they're not condemning each other. They're not having conflict between people. They're having conflict between ideas. Non-functioning teams often thrive on attacks. Non-functioning teams tend to ignore controversial topics. And that's critical to team success. If you can't get into the controversial topics, how are you going to get the results? And they'll fail to tap into the opinions of everybody. Even your best teams, conflict is a bit uncomfortable, no matter how clear everything is. But they stay focused on the issues, not on the personalities. They might say, I'm sorry, I just don't agree with your approach to that. That's not putting that person down. If you're not having a little uncomfortable times, if you're never pushing each other, are you really a highly effective team? Because you've got to get out of the comfort zones. Because in this world of business, everything is moving so quickly. And you're either moving ahead with it or you're actually falling behind. There is no staying the same. So you're going to have to push people to get out of their comfort zone. All right, so once we have this trust and we have the conflict built, the next thing we have to look at is the commitment. Just like trust and conflict, commitment is when team members are willing to weigh in and share their opinion, and they feel like their voice has been heard. Whether or not that's the plan of action really becomes immaterial. The fact that they were heard and that maybe somebody else in the team has talked and helped them to understand why maybe their approach is not as effective or somebody else's is just a little better. But once they get there, you know, there's a high likelihood that people will commit to the decision that's made. Teams that fail to commit, they have team members going in all kinds of different directions and different priorities. And they'll watch as opportunities are lost. sales are lost. And that breeds lack of confidence. Fear of failure is huge. And they'll tend to revisit discussions and decisions over and over and over again and come to no conclusions. I can remember one time being on this team, which may have been more of a group than a team. And month after month, we'd bring up the same topic. I was like, how many times do you have to discuss the same thing? Well, it's because there was no commitment. There was no trust. We'd never really gone through a conflict on it. We discussed it, but it was not really conflict. And therefore, whatever decisions were made, nobody really followed through with. And that's what you'll see. There's no commitment because people don't feel like their voice was heard. So they'll have the attitude, well, I'm not going to do anything with that. I hope it does fall flat in its face. See, that's the attitude that people have. This is why it's so important to have productive teams. Teams that commit to decisions and standards will typically buy in and they'll have clarity on what they're doing. You know, a lot of times on various teams I was on, it would be, you know, the consensus. Sometimes we'd actually vote on it. Well, the majority thinks this. That didn't mean people were going to commit to that decision. It just meant that they weren't heard and they felt like they were dismissed. When that happens, when there's a false consensus, team members will just kind of nod and then they'll move on to their own way, their own path. Commitment is about a group of individuals that will buy into that decision. Even if they don't naturally agree to it, they'll still buy in. So it's the ability to defy that lack of consensus. When people know their colleagues have no reservation about disagreeing with one another, and every available opinion and perspective was given. And sometimes you do need to have the leader say, this is what we're going to do. And just end the discussion by making that decision. But at least people feel like they had an ability to express their opinion. Now, good leaders will drive that commitment among the team. First, by getting every possible idea and opinion and perspective out. And then be comfortable knowing that nothing was left off the table. And they'll step in, make the decision. The fact is that, however, you know, most people don't really need to have their ideas adopted. It's not really getting my opinion in. It's just being heard and understood. And that it was even considered. And, you know, a lot of times even people that may have gone into a meeting thinking they had the best idea will come out saying, well, that really was better. I didn't think of that. So once you have that clarity and clear understanding about that decision, then people will move on. So the next level, so we've had the trust, we've had the conflict, now we have the commitment. The next part is accountability, and this is so important. Accountability is our willingness to hold each other accountable so that the leader doesn't have to do it all. Asking the leader to hold everybody accountable is inefficient. And it could actually cause some discontentment among people. So teams that don't hold each other accountable, they can create resentment among team members with different standards of performance. And how many times I think of this as in school teams that you had that maybe you were put in with other people. How many times did one or two people do all the work? And that's the way a work team will get. Certain people will do all the work, and then other people will just kind of, let them do it because they're lazy or they just don't care. One of the teams I was on when I was working was a team where you had 3 very committed people and 2 that couldn't have cared less. And those 2 that couldn't have cared less did very little. Now, every once in a while, they'd come up with a good idea, but then they wouldn't do anything about it. They'd let the other 3 take it over and take care of it. That's not a cohesive team. So when you don't have an accountability, creates mediocrity, missed deadlines. The team leader often has a lot on them. And I think of that team today and why because sometimes I was a team leader. Why did I allow that to happen? Well, because they were kind of like bullies. And when you have a bully on your team and nobody above you will deal with that bully, you just kind of let it go. Because again, you don't want the conflict. You don't want that uncomfortableness. And so you just let it go. And it continues to fester. Now, if somebody in authority would have started to take care of that, it would have made a difference. But nobody was willing to do that. And there wasn't enough peer pressure from everybody else that these 2 were letting everybody else down. So it's understandable why you sometimes have that reluctance, but you really need to have people holding each other accountable for effective teams. We sort of had a dysfunctional team. Some things we did very well, but it was usually when 3 of us did all the work. So let's look at the results, because that's really what we're in it for, is the results. And why do you have a team of working together? Well, to get a certain result. Now, maybe, some jobs you don't need a team, and that's fine. But if you have need of a team, you're focused on the results. And when the team fails to focus on results, it rarely moves ahead. And you often will lose achievement. The highly productive people are the ones that will start to go to another team or go to another business. And then you also, when you don't have a team focused on results, you have team members that are focused on themselves and where their individual goal is and where their careers are going. It becomes a distraction, and it keeps the team from growing, obviously, because the individual people see themselves as, I'm just looking out for me. Cohesive teams focus on the results for their team as it relates to the entire organization. And they become rather intolerant of actions and behaviors that serve the individual interest. And because of that, the team members are willing to sacrifice for the organization and for the collective results that they're looking for. So what this is all about is we have this natural tendency to look out for ourselves before others. And even, what's going to be best for the family. But once that kicks in, the trust is destroyed. And remember, the trust is foundational. Now, if you're looking to build cohesive teams and you're looking to build the best productive team, there's a couple things you want to make sure before you start doing this. You want to make sure that your team has been established for 6 to 8 weeks. And the reason I say this is part of what I do when I come in to work with a team is I do an assessment. But if the team hasn't really worked together, if it's a brand new team, that assessment is not going to be very, very accurate. So you really want to have a team that's worked together for 6 to 8 weeks. And then I can come in, do the assessment and see where the weaknesses are in the team, where the strengths are in the team, and then go from there. So the other thing you have to watch is for teams that are changing. And that's also not a good time. If there's team members are leaving or joining a different team or changing the team's responsibility, that's not a good time to start this. Again, you need that 6 to 8 weeks of cohesiveness. Now, why is this assessment important? Because it gives you honest feedback. And that honest feedback is so important because every answer is anonymous. So people are going to be honest with what they're sharing. Nobody's going to say, oh, so-and-so wrote that opinion. Nobody will know. It's an honest assessment. And it looks at where the team is struggling. And then once we figure all that out, then we build the appropriate training to impact the team. And then after we do that for some time, then we take the assessment again and we look at the results, and then we can see a valid answer to what happened and where the increase is, where there's still work to be done. And it's not uncommon. We use like traffic lights. So red's, oh, this is alarm, yellow, kind of cautionary, green, you're good to go. But we want to get as many of these 5 pillars to the green, because then you're running at a really highly productive state and you're getting the results that you want. So for more information, I suggest that you book a call with me, and then I can share with you all the information on how your business could run very effectively and build highly effective teams.